So far, I see on the screen, and we've got from the committee, John and Ken, and then it looks like Mayor Williams is on now. I think Louise is probably coming on here pretty soon. And not sure about Jeremy. We'll give him a couple more minutes and get started here.
Hey, Mark, it's David. Did you hear anything back from Jeremy at all for tonight's meeting?
He did accept it originally when I sent the invitation out.
Okay.
Last week or several days ago.
I just want to check. You may want to give him just a couple minutes to get on.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. Ken, it's good to have you join us. Sorry about the conditions on the original meeting. I hate that came up.
It was just one of those things.
Yeah, it's definitely something we all have to deal with, for sure.
She was not COVID. She was just had blood clots that went to her lungs.
Yeah.
Hello.
Mark, thanks for sending out another version of the slides tonight this afternoon. I had no idea why I couldn't open that first one, but it just, when I would click PowerPoint, it just did not like it.
Yeah. Sometimes on those files that have a lot of images, I try to share them through OneDrive, and that may or may not work for everybody. So I just sent it as a copy, which I think ended up turning out okay. Looks like Jeremy's here.
Yeah, I'm here. Hello.
Okay. Hey, Jeremy. You got Louise, as should be here in a minute. I just talked to her this afternoon, so pretty sure she knows about this. We'll try to definitely go no longer than 6:30. If any of you need to leave before then, that's certainly fine. You're not getting paid a lot of money for this, so it just kind of let me know, I guess, before you leave if you need to leave the meeting earlier. But we'll try to keep it to no more than an hour and a half at the most. I may go ahead and just start on a couple of things, and then Louise she'll be joining us here in a minute, I'm sure, just to go ahead for the sake of time and everybody's schedule. It's a little bit more focused meeting this time. You know, the last meeting we reviewed the components of the initial draft of an aesthetic plan, you know, what that really meant for the town, what we're trying to do, what are some of our assumptions, and then, you know, objectives and definitions and things like that. And then we talked through different types of polls and scenarios that we may see in the town and how we might want to try to address those things from an aesthetic perspective. And really, as I mentioned at the first meeting, the aesthetic plan would apply to essentially new, what we call vertical utility infrastructure. That could be telecommunications structures, or it could be street lighting, or potentially other types of utilities that I haven't thought about at this point. It would not apply to existing overhead distribution and transmission line systems. Those are basically classified as overhead utility systems in our plan, and they're essentially grandfathered at this point. The only thing that would affect those is if you had a situation where a pole was being completely replaced, a type 2 scenario in our plan, then the pole, as we're recommending, would have to go back as a metal pole, so that we could try to accommodate as much of the vertical utility infrastructure within the pole itself where possible. So
Since you brought that up, Mark,
yes,
I don't know if we're already in the talking part, but since you brought that piece up, that was one of the concerns that I had from, this is from me being on the utility side of things, not part of this committee side of things. It's hard to separate, but for instance, LCUV does a lot of a proactive pole replacement program where we go out and look at wood poles and things like that. And there's quite a bit of inspection goes on, and we determine if what needs to be replaced and when and so forth and so on. If this falls under that, in other words, if we're on some side road in Farragut or some subdivision that's overhead and we're replacing, you know, it's a single phase line, it's not 3-phase line, it's whatever, we're replacing those poles and we're required to put in galvanized steel poles in those locations and not be able to put wood poles back, that's going to increase our expenses significantly. Now, in critical pole infrastructure, like out on Kingston Pike, where it's double circuit, 3-phase, we're going to put back steel poles. But in some of these subdivisions and some of these side roads, things like that, when it's just a small single-phase line or a 2-phase or even a smaller 3-phase that doesn't have much on it, that from a utility standpoint, and I'd imagine TDS would be the same way. I don't even think they have steel poles. It might put us in an expense bind if we had to replace all those, because we may have to replace a ton of those types of poles in a given year to 10-year cycle. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I guess I would need to understand and differentiate between the kinds of poles that would be a challenge for y'all to replace with metal, and then the kind that would, I guess, would the poles that you would basically go back with wood, are those ones that are more likely to be able to accommodate new vertical utility infrastructure without replacing the pole? Because
no,
like so much infrastructure on them.
If you're talking about vertical use infrastructure, this is where we got to get our definitions right on my part. If we're talking about vertical infrastructure being, hey, we're putting a new light series down through here, or we're putting, especially, hey, we're putting a small cell out here or some kind of antenna contraption on this pole, we're going to go with a steel pole. I'm just talking about by creating this chapter or this section, putting us in a space where we're just doing routine maintenance on our pole changeouts. And we've got a rule that says, and I could define this better, that says, okay, this level of pole, we automatically go back with steel instead of wood, because steel lasts longer, steel's more durable. If cars hit them, they're a little bit more durable, things like that. There's less to change problem with changing out, because our biggest expense is a change out on a very difficult pole. Anything that you see, like 2 sets of lines on, multiple communications, all that stuff, anything up Kingston Pike you see, it would be that type of pole. But when you get on some of these other roads, and I'm just trying to think of some,
like in Stonecrest or Village Green, places like that.
Yeah, if you go in places like that, Fox Run, I don't even know if that's in Farragut or not.
Yeah, it is.
But you know, some of those places like that have some overhead infrastructure that's it's a single phase line, and if a wood pole goes bad in 30 years versus 50 years, it's really easy for us to change out because the complexity of the change out is easy due to there's not much on it.
The only time that the way this is worded right now, Jeremy, is the only time that you'd have to replace a pole, at least in the draft language at this point, is if new vertical utility infrastructure were proposed to be added to this system. So it wouldn't be for maintenance of existing structures that are on the system itself. It would be like if somebody wanted to go into Stonecrest and they've got wood pole in there and they're wanting to add a couple of telecommunication antennas and maybe even a new street light if the community wanted it on that part of the existing overhead utility system. What we're recommending under that scenario is that it would be replaced with a metal pole so that as much of the new vertical infrastructure could be contained ideally in the pole, and it would be more durable and long lasting and potentially more multifunction, have a more of a ability to accommodate other users in the future just because of the structural characteristics of the metal versus wood. So I don't know if that makes it better from your all's perspective. So we wouldn't really require a pole replacement, unless some new infrastructure was proposed to be added to that existing system. Now, if somebody's wanting to come out and they can't add to your system because they can't fit it in there, which is probably going to be the case on most of your lines, frankly,
right?
Then they're going to be looking at a Type 3 pole. Is what we have in our plan, and that is a pole that's just completely new pole in a new location.
Right, and that
probably doesn't
take care of
affect
that.
you all. Yeah. So
it's
I don't know
Type 2.
The Type 2.
Yeah. That concerned me a little bit just by the language, because if you say vertical utility infrastructure, and I can't remember in the definitions if it defines specifically what vertical utility infrastructure was, but if that includes distribution lines and all that, that's where it can become sticky. But if it just includes these antennas, sliding fixtures, things like that, then maybe that's where the separation is.
But in the context of this plan, the key and it is defined in our plan, but the key word is proposed. It's utilities that are proposed, not existing. They're proposed within public rights of ways, and they have a vertical component. In other words, they're exposed to the above the surface. So
if LCB did build a new line down a road that doesn't currently have a line, then you'd want us to put in steel structures, is what you're saying.
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, ideally, and depending on the context, it need to be underground. But
sure, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Then it would be, it would defer. But that would essentially become a Type 3 distribution line system, really.
Yeah.
In that case, I mean, I can work through this Type 2 with you just to make sure.
Yeah,
we're clear on that.
I don't want to take up this whole time with that discussion, so.
Oh no, that's good to know. I mean, I don't want something that we don't want to create a document that you all can't follow, or it's not, it doesn't make sense. So.
Well, and I want you to have the pulse on your, which I'm sure you all do, on your residents here, that some people may not like the look. But okay, I've replaced a wooden pole, and now I'm in my subdivision, and now I'm putting a steel pole, and now I've got a wood pole, a steel pole, wood pole, steel pole. Yeah, I don't know how that makes sense, but
yeah, I mean, the feedback I've received, at least from the committee members on the initial draft, that was one of the questions I asked, was if the committee members at least wanted to recommend that we stay with, go with metal and not really have as an option wood. And I think the committee members that I heard from basically like the metal concept, so that over time, yeah, you might have kind of a hodgepodge for a while, but eventually over time that system is going to be
Consolidate.
replaced
Yeah.
with a more durable. Because if you keep, it's kind of like signage that gets grandfathered in. If you never make that signage come into compliance or to some kind of different standard, then it's just going to be it's going to be in conflict
Sure.
with your ordinance forever. I mean, there's
Sure.
never a termination to it. So I guess that's something certainly I'm open to. I understand what you're talking about with the wood matching the existing context, and that's kind of what Verizon did with most of their 10 poles that they have been working on putting up. They in areas where there was existing wooden poles associated with distribution lines that they went back with, and they were type 3 poles what they were proposing, but they were all wood just to be consistent with the other poles that are around them. So and I and I understand that makes sense. um,
Well, we even have options of getting, and I'm sure they do too. If you're in a wood area where wood poles, you can still get a steel pole that's brown.
yeah
Um,
Yeah.
that's rust. We can buy rust poles, things like that. So
yeah
they look like wood.
yeah
Anyway,
Okay. No, I
I'm
think
good
that's
with
good.
all that.
That's good.
I'm good with
That's a
all
good
that.
discussion. Okay, well, we can, anything that you all think of or come up with that's not really on this agenda certainly is open for discussion. I just put together this agenda just to have a focus kind of this meeting. To go back, to the concepts that we're looking at tonight, I'm really just going to kind of briefly review the comments that I received from committee members on the initial draft, and then we'll discuss a little bit of the staff response to those comments. And then really, I guess from my perspective at least, I'd like to spend a fair amount of time looking at the lighting aspect of this plan. Now that doesn't mean that we spend most of the evening looking at other things. It's up to you all, but I would like to try to get your feedback and thoughts on fixture styles for maybe different locations like town center or a mixed use neighborhood setting, a gateway area like we have at Concord Road, for example, or Watt Road, or even the interstate, and then maybe just general commercial areas that are really not any of those overlay kind of situations. And residential is kind of something that I think we're going to have to think a little bit more about with the lighting. I think the first question with lighting in residential, and one of the comments that I think John made on the lighting, is it's not our intent to impose street lighting if in a subdivision that doesn't have it, if the subdivision doesn't want it. I mean, you may end up in that case with a freestanding pole that just accommodates telecommunications infrastructure, and that's fine. The objective of new vertical infrastructure is that it's flexible, that it has the ability to accommodate other users in the future. So we may end up with a pole that just has a 5G antenna on it, but the point is that antenna is placed in a location. The pole is of a material, and it has the ability to handle additional vertical infrastructure, so that we don't have to add a lot more poles in the community. We can try to take the poles that we have and accommodate as many new vertical utilities as we can on those poles. So that's kind of an overriding objective of what we're trying to accomplish. I know there's some concern about the health effects of having more than one antenna on a pole. That's not really something that certainly I'm not an expert on, and from what I've have heard. It doesn't seem like that's, a real concern, a legitimate concern. I don't think it has, there's really doesn't seem to be a lot of merit to that. So I think from the aesthetic plan perspective, what I'm going to be recommending, at least from my perspective, is trying to have, a pole that can accommodate at least two telecommunication antennas and potentially a source of light as well. Again, to try to minimize the physical number of additional poles in the future. So let's go through some of these things. The comments that I received, I think I had a series of questions that I posed to the committee members, and the feedback that I received is I think they were generally good with the layout of the plan, the components of the plan. There are some things that they had asked to add or clarify. One of the things that John, I think, added in there was the concept of fiber sharing where it exists. I'm not sure that it exists currently in the town. That's something that we would need to look into. But it is something that.
Mark, can I ask a quick question of John? Is fiber sharing the same thing as future proofing? Is that because that's the term that's been used with me, is future proofing, so that they don't have to go and drill again.
That's possible. I wasn't thinking about it particularly from that standpoint, but that may be one and the same thing. The idea simply is this: there's a fair amount of fiber run across the country and across neighborhoods and communities already, a significant chunk of which is what they call dead fiber, and that it's not actually being used, or it's fiber with such a substantial bandwidth that it could run two or more signals simultaneously without causing any degradation at all. So the idea would be, if there's fiber there, why can't you use that fiber? It would be the question to ask of any developer coming in to put a new system in place.
Okay,
Yeah,
I appreciate that clarification.
And I got the.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jeremy.
Go ahead, Jeremy.
No, I was just going to say I was wondering the same thing that was just asked, the definition of that. So that's good to hear that. I will say, from somebody that's, and I don't know if we got a representative from TDS on here, but it, from a standpoint of fiber, it's hard to get. Well, it's not hard to get them to share fiber, right? But sometimes they try to price each other out of the market so that they can't. And you're totally right. I mean, fiber is out there and available, and they can use optics to bust one fiber up that can hold 40 different wavelengths of up to 10 gig a piece. So, it's just getting them to work together, them being the telecoms.
I agree. It will be a challenge to get any two of them to agree to do anything together. The reality of the technology is exactly as you say. There's a tremendous amount of capacity within the fiber to allow a lot of this stuff to happen without turning the right of way into Swiss cheese.
Exactly.
I think I've heard the term future proofing, and my understanding was it's slightly different than what you're describing. I know when a I don't know what you call it, the fiber cable, the cable that goes down, that the fiber is held in, can hold an empty tube in it that they can feed future what's been explained to me.
That's a different concept, but it certainly is a valid one we should consider.
Yeah, and if we're talking fiber sharing, we may want to also address future.
Okay, I can look into that a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I looked a little bit into the fiber sharing after John brought that up, and Yeah, and that is an aesthetic related, aspect of utility systems because, like you said, the less we can minimize existing neighborhoods with, you know, putting in under and above ground conduit, the better. I mean, we've had, some issues in recent months with some of these installations, and you know, it if it can be avoided by people trying to share and work together with existing infrastructure that's already in place, that's certainly an ideal situation. What I proposed in the draft in the revision was basically to include that as something you look at as a requirement as part of your aesthetic plan to assess whether it's currently an option. The applicant would have to determine whether it's available, and if they're not proposing to use it, they need to explain and provide specific reasons as to why they're not using it. And then that would be evaluated as part of the application review. They can't just say, well, we don't want to use it. They need to be specific about why they really can't use it. That's really kind of what we're looking at. Is, to me, it seems like it would, if they could work together, it seems like it would make sense financially because these companies wouldn't have to go in on their own and put a new conduit in. That's obviously very expensive. So it would seem to me that the more they could work together and share things, the better. It's kind of like putting these structures on existing poles that are in an overhead utility system. To me, that'd be the ideal situation where it's possible, because the person that's proposing the new infrastructure doesn't have to put up a new pole. So it's kind of the same concept with the fiber.
Yeah, it fits together nicely, and there is an economic incentive for these guys to do it, and it's exactly what you suggest. It costs more or less $500,000 a mile to run fiber, and um, and if you could save half or 2/3 of that, why in the world wouldn't you want to do that?
Yeah, it makes sense to me. I'm not in the business, but it kind of makes common sense to me, at least. so, um, so we've tried to address that. That's on page 4 of the revised plan that I'd emailed you all last week. And then I think John also brought up having some provisions in there for demonstrating who the owner of different infrastructure would be, because that's important in terms of maintenance liability. If something is no longer needed, then who's responsible for removing the structure, and then making sure that these structures aren't used to display commercial signage. So those things were addressed in a couple of different sections of the plan. Actually, on the last text page of the plan, on page 20, I actually added a separate section that deals with ownership, maintenance, liability, removal, and signage. And then in addition to that, there's also a section that was added on the same page for what's the appeals process. If somebody doesn't like a decision of the town staff or the planning commission, then where do they go? And so what I proposed there is that they would appeal their issue to the Board of Mayor and Alderman. And of course, if they don't like that, then they could always go to court. But that's a similar process of appeal for some of our other, ordinances that are in the municipal code. That way it gives, yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
With regard to the appeals process, I would think part of the state that as well.
You're breaking out just a little bit, Louise.
I don't know if you need to just
if anybody else is having that problem, but I missed part of that. Can you say that again?
I'm sorry. Hopefully this is getting better. I have such technological issues. allows for an appeals process straight to, I think, Chancery Court or the local court. So that might be something we want to address in our, just as a formality.
I guess my question is, would you want them to appeal it to the Board of Mayor and Alderman first, and then the reason I have it being appealed to the Board of Mayor and Alderman is all this infrastructure has to be within the public right of way. So that's really the Board of Mayor and Alderman's property as representatives of the town. So if somebody doesn't want to do something in that physical space, to me, it seems the logical body that would, potentially grant them relief from something would be the Board of Mayor and Alderman. So that's why that's in there.
I agree with you on
If
that.
they don't like that, then they certainly could appeal it to the next level. But that way you all can make the decisions whether you want whatever they're proposing or what modifications they're wanting from what was, recommended by the Planning Commission. And you all have that final say if they want to appeal it.
Hey, Mark, it's David.
I
agree with that. That appeals?
I agree with
Mark,
that.
how would that appeals process deal with the shot clock that we have to deal with on approvals of these polls in general?
Well, that's something I'd have to talk with Tom a little bit about that. I would think that if the Planning Commission has, let's say we've made a decision, we've acted on something, denied some aspect of the plan that was submitted that the applicant wanted, and they didn't agree with that, but we would not sit on it, we've taken action on it, we've denied it. So I think the important thing is that the Planning Commission needs to take a specific action on something, and if somebody wants to appeal it, that's what I'd have to talk with probably with Tom about, is to how that would relate to the shot clock. Because to me, once the thing is, we've denied it, it's been denied. So we've taken action. There's really not anything that could be done to affect that. If they don't like it, then they can take that somewhere else. In this case, it'd be the Board of Mayor and Alderman. Now, if that affects the shot clock at that point, that's something I really don't have an answer for you on. But the key, again, is that the Planning Commission or the staff, whoever's making the decision, needs to make a decision, and not, leave it kind of lingering, so that it's clear that the decision's been made, the shot clock has ceased because we've decided on it. We've not, it's not been undecided, and therefore it's been approved by default.
Mark, quick question on that. What's the benefit of having an appeal process, given that the state law already specifies that if a city, denies an application, that the applicant can also reapply?
Well, it's up to the applicant as to how they want to deal with the denial. If they want to reapply, then they could do that. We don't have to provide an appeal, I guess. That was a suggestion that was asked by one of the committee members, and I think it's actually a good suggestion. I mean, what happens if somebody disagrees with something? Where does it go? And that just adds a little clarity to that kind of scenario. But if somebody wanted to just resubmit, they got denied, they want to resubmit something different, then that really wouldn't be related to this process. This is something where somebody has submitted something, some aspect of it, or maybe the whole thing has been denied, and we've given specific reasons for it. Then they, can appeal it to, in this case, the Board of Mayor and Alderman. And then if they don't like that, they can go to court at that point.
Yeah, Mark, I think that sounds like a good process. I think the issue is we need to make sure from a legal standpoint that we got the shot clock in mind. How is that going to work into our process already in order to go from the Planning Commission to the board, and how much time that takes? So I think getting with Tom would be the best thing to do, before we take to the planning commission and make sure we get that solidified before making a recommendation to them.
Okay. Yep. I'm making a note of that. That's good. Okay.
Here, William.
Yes, sir.
That's, I think, what you could get into there is if it, where we've seen, okay, it's took a while, it took a certain period of time to get it, depending on when it was filed, to get it on the agenda. And then it may be that it's past time to get it on the, go to the board, mayor, and alderman. So it would have to maybe roll over to the next month, and you may run out of shot clock. I think that's what David's getting at.
Well, to be honest, and they thought the shot clock was still running. So that the whole thing is kind of who manages the shot clock is the question.
That's a good question. It is very confusing. I had to keep a log of it with in the case of the Verizon submittals as to when something came in, when we responded, because when you respond, you send it to them, the shot clock ceases at that point. It's in their court essentially. Then when they resubmit something, you reactivate the shot clock. So you kind of have to monitor through the whole process really, and it can get a little bit, difficult, especially if you had a lot of applications at once, and heaven forbid applications from multiple carriers. That'd really be a nightmare. So yeah, I'll talk that through with Tom, and just get his thoughts on that. And maybe we don't even need to establish that. We just act on it at the planning commission level, and if somebody wants to appeal it, then they can go to the appropriate court for that, and that's the way you deal with it. But I'll have that conversation with Tom.
Mayor, again, it may be a situation where we'd have to have a special call board meeting just to address it and stay within the time allowance.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I'll talk with Tom on that. I have my thoughts on it. I don't think it really affects the shot clock if the planning commission takes an affirmative action on it, but I'll talk with him about it and make sure that we're on the same page. And we may get rid of the whole section altogether, but I'll do that before we take anything to the planning commission. As far as the other comments that I received, some of it was just some clarification in the language, naming the poles more logically, I guess, the different pole types as to what they really were. But I didn't sense that there was a lot of major comments or issues with the draft. Now, if I'm wrong, certainly please let me know.
Mark, here's a couple of just quick things on
Yes,
page 5. Page 5, type 1 existing pole, paragraph 2, you used the word should a couple of times, and I'm guessing you didn't want to use should, you wanted to say shall, but I just want to call out to your attention for.
Yeah. Yeah, I did think about that word. Yeah, I mean, I could probably change that to shall. Yeah.
And then also on that same page under item 5, each pole shall be able to handle wind load using proper material and design. We might want to specify, well, how much wind load? 50 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, horseback tornado, or what are we talking about there?
Yeah, typically it's 120.
Okay.
But I'll
and it well may be called in other rules and so forth that the town already has.
Okay.
Can I just add to that comment. Somebody made the comment of adding the guying
Guy wires. Yeah.
guy wires in there. I just I just thought it was a little confusing where it was put. Um, like in type 1 existing pole, line 5, you're talking about structures not mounted on the pole and contained in underground vaults, and then you put the use of guy wires. Doesn't really seem to go there. In my mind, that's if right there where you're talking about underground stuff.
I'm wondering, I wonder if we could just take that sentence out actually, because for type 1 pole, I mean, a lot of type 1 poles are already going to have a guy wire. I mean, I know
Exactly.
it's grandfathered in. That's a grandfathered scenario. What we're really talking about there is new, stability systems. So maybe for the type 1 pole, it might be okay to just take that out. I think it needs to be in there for 2 and 3 somewhere, maybe not.
Somewhere,
exactly.
I just, yeah, because I get what you're getting at. I just didn't know if that was the right location. In that particular use for underground vaults.
Yeah.
I had one other.
I could put no new equipment, including guy wires or similar mechanical stability restraints. Well, something like that. It basically ties that into the previous sentence that all these things, they can't be above ground.
Right.
Yeah, I'll look at that a little bit closer.
I have to look at that.
Merge that together a little bit. Okay.
One other thing, a couple of notes that I'll just rattle through here that I thought was pretty important. On page 6, the exhibit 1, you've got the RF equipment up there as a symbol, and then you got 24-inch minimum under max sag.
Under the last, yep.
NESC, National Electric Safety Code, requires 40 inches minimum. If you're talking about that's electrical wiring up there that you're referencing.
Okay.
Now, if that's communications cables, that's a different story. But if those 3 wires you're showing up there represent any kind of electrical wiring, that minimum distance there has to be 40 inches.
Okay. Yeah, as we talked about a little bit in the first session, is frankly a type 1 pole is, although ideal really in some ways, because you're not putting a new pole out there, is probably not going to be very common.
You're exactly right.
Maybe never.
You're exactly right.
But because I think your all's policy, as I recall, unlike NEC, maybe you don't want any antenna above at the very top of the pole, like some of the images we looked at last time.
Right, and then you still got to have, even if you did that, you still got to have the separation, so you'd have to install another pole anyway. So it'd become a type 2.
So then you're getting into the type 2, yeah. So type 1's probably kind of an unlikely scenario at this point, yeah.
But there could be some out there. But anyway, that's one, and then the other one, type 2 replacement pole on sentence 3. There's a diameter listed in there to be 12.75 inches. That could run into issues with ours, and I got a spreadsheet from our group on diameters of some of our poles that we could put in, particularly steel poles.
Okay.
And if we go up to, I wouldn't allow any of this on a transmission line. It's just too cumbersome and difficult. It would be hard to do. I mean, there may be exceptions, but we could still go up to a 65-foot pole on distribution, 60, 65, and you're looking at 13.5 inches diameter there at the ground line. That's not at the base. It's even bigger at the base, but that's going to be so many feet
Yeah.
down.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about with the riser pole section. That's that mid section. The slimmest part would be 12.75. And I got that is a standard I've seen in some other documents that I've looked at, and then I actually went out and measured poles. I mean,
Yeah.
kind of a strange thing, but and yeah, it seemed like most of the poles that I measured, at least not transmission line poles because they are much wider.
Typically, that's going to be fine. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There may be
Yeah.
some rare exceptions that you get up to 14 inches, though, on some of the thicker poles, depending on what's on it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if. Yeah, let me circle that. I'd like to keep the standard,
Yeah.
as small as possible, and then if there's some kind of an exceptional situation, it seems like there would be an opportunity to request some variation from that.
Right.
Maybe that language needs to be in here somewhere.
That's not going to be the norm. You're correct. What you've
12
got
that
should cover
fit
it.
most of it. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I did go out and physically measure a lot of poles, of
Sure.
all different types, and that seemed to be, actually a little wider than almost all the ones that I measured. So
Yeah, most of ours are 45 to 50-foot poles, and that's around anywhere from 11 to 12 and a half, depending on the manufacturer.
yeah, that's a good comment. I'll circle it and give that some thought. Maybe there's always a way that if something came up that you could have it revisited given the circumstances, kind of like a variance request, because of some unusual situation that was really out of the control of all the parties involved.
The only other real comment that I have, and I'll be quiet and let you move on, but is we talked about the shared fiber. I think it'd be good to have that in the definitions section because other people call that many different things.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah,
Least
define
fiber,
what that
shared
is.
fiber, define what that means.
Okay. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree with that because I had to look it up myself to figure out what that exactly meant. So fiber sharing, it may be that I don't know if this future proofing is, if we reference it in the plan, we will need to define it. If we don't, there's no point in defining it, but I'll definitely define fiber sharing if we're going to have it in the plan. So let me add that to the definition section. No, those are very good comments. Actually, that's perfect. Appreciate the feedback. I don't know what if other than lighting, which we can start on here in a minute. What other comments or questions do any of you all have on the plan? I know Louise had a question about the antenna, the radio antenna or radio equipment with 4G poles, and there are some images and places that I've seen, like some of the ones you sent me earlier today, but that appear to show that you could put the radio equipment kind of in the riser pole where it's not quite as wide, but it would probably make for a little bit wider riser pole section, but it's a possibility. I mean, what I was proposing in really exhibits 2 and 3 was showing a 4 or 5G combination pole, and the 4G is going to have the radio equipment that the ones that are going up in the town right now that were approved back in January. Most of those are all the 4G poles, and I think there were 5 of them. They'll have this box that'll be mounted to the side of the wood pole. Of course, that's another reason why the wood is not desired. But it protrudes out from the side of the pole, so it adds kind of a physical bulk to the appearance of the pole. makes it stand out a little bit more. And that's really to accommodate the radio equipment for 4G system. The 5G doesn't really have that, so it can more or less be accommodated in other places. So that's one benefit of the 5G. The antenna might be slightly wider on a 5G compared to 4G, but doesn't have that radio equipment. So really what these exhibits show is that if you did have a 4G combination situation, that, we don't want the radio equipment hanging from the side of the pole. Even a lot of the images that, let me go through some of these here. I'm just going to look at, just to show you some of these images from other communities and what we're talking about here. And like here, and I don't have, let me point this out. These things here protruding off the side of the pole. Otherwise, it's a pretty nice looking pole. But then you got, just trying to, basically the idea, one of the objectives of the plan is to make the new vertical infrastructure as narrow and stealth as possible. If you're going to have a little bit more width, try to accommodate it on at the base to balance out the top and the bottom, give the pole as a whole kind of a balanced look. This pole here is a 5G, so it doesn't have that equipment to have to worry about. You got the antenna at the top. We'll look at these lights here in a minute, but these are some of the lighting related images that show a little bit of what we're talking about with different, I'm trying to find one that has, here's some of that radio equipment on this pole, and an antenna that protrudes out. And again, this is not something I think we would want to see in our aesthetic plan, but that kind of illustrates what we're talking about. If you're going to provide for the radio equipment and have the opportunity for 4G on a pole, let's, place it either, if you can, in the pole, and probably the technology will be there in the near future to where they can get that smaller and get it in the pole more. But this pole here also has 4G, and you can see how it's been accommodated at the base. It's really hardly noticeable, and it really kind of balances the pole, as a whole. It gives it kind of a frame around the base that kind of blends in with the street furniture more. It gives it kind of an aesthetic component. And it balances the bottom with the top because the top widens out slightly. So that's again an objective overall of the plan, is to try to look at the pole as a whole and try to make it as narrow as possible, but give it some symmetry and balance and proper transition as you work your way from the bottom to the top. So I guess the answer to that question, Louise, is it probably is doable. I don't know enough about it yet, but I would probably propose at this point something like we see in these exhibits, to where it balances the pole at the top and the bottom. The only concern there is the pole's going to be a little bit wider, obviously, at the base, and if you put it in an area where you've got a sidewalk or it's real tight space, that extra width could create an issue. So that's something to think about. You need to assess what the existing infrastructure is in that right of way, whether it's a tree or a sidewalk or a curb of a driveway or whatever, and try to figure out what would work the best. These exhibits are just kind of giving you a general idea of, these are the concepts. This is the end product that we're looking for, with the key concepts described in the text of the document, and objectives of what we're trying to accomplish. Let's see. Does anybody else have anything you want to add about the plan itself before we start looking at lighting a little bit more?
Mark, this is Ken Shipley.
Yes,
Since
Ken.
the latest draft for the plan, I seem to have probably deleted it off my email or something. I've lost it, but I've been looking at the Viewgrass closely. So, but when you get a chance, just send me a copy of the plan.
Okay. Yeah, I'll make sure y'all get that. Yep. Yep, no problem. Anybody else have anything you want to add or modify here? I've made notes of all the things you've discussed, and I'll address these things, and I will talk to the town attorney. I mean, are y'all comfortable, I guess, with the exhibits that we're showing? I mean, do those look like what you would want to see if people put a new pole out in town in general? I mean, does that look like?
Mark, I had sent to you the ones with the fixtures on top. I know
Yeah.
I sent that out to you guys earlier in the year. I know that it would probably elevate the height of the pole, but just something that there you go. You just passed it.
This one. Yeah.
Yeah. Something that we may want to consider in certain areas. I know in Fox Run we have light poles with the lights at the top. Of course, that's gonna, if they're gonna try and put those in Fox Run, it would be, I think I've seen them in neighborhoods at 26 feet high. And then of course the light pole, the light portion makes it even taller. So I know that's a consideration, but wondering if that certainly should be an option for neighborhoods. We certainly want to give neighborhoods the ability to understand what they have available to them, so that they're not, if something's more stealth, they believe is more stealth and works with their neighborhood, that they have that option.
Maybe we could clarify that these exhibits, they show the general desired look and the components that we want to see, but that there still needs to be some ability to have some flexibility based on the context, I guess, and look at it from that perspective. But this kind of shows you, this illustrates the concepts of the plan, which is again to make the new infrastructure as small as possible, have it all together, not dangling out from the pole and cluttered looking, and just generally kind of blending in with the setting as much as possible. But like you said, there's going to be situations where the pole on the left there would be really probably very appropriate where you've got residential street lighting. Now, whether this kind of pole, this pole is shown as about 15 feet to here. So, based at least on the feedback that I've heard from the telecommunications folks, is that's not going to be high enough for them. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that would be something that but generally this pole, the higher it gets, if the lighting is going to be functional, then it's going to lose more functionality, because unlike this fixture that hangs out over the traveled way, this one's going to be more limited. The distribution of light would not go as far because of basically the placement of the luminaire on the pole. So that's something that that we could maybe, I don't know if it would be good to have, just a couple of exhibits for the type 2 and type 3 poles. Maybe one that's similar to this, and maybe one similar to what's in the plan, the draft plan, and illustrating that there's different ways to achieve the objectives of the plan. We know what the components are and what we're trying to accomplish, but there's more than, every pole doesn't have to necessarily look just like the ones on Exhibit 2 and 3.
Mark, a comment. I think we need to be careful that we don't create a false impression that either the standard is saying to the telecommunications people that you can only put in a 15 or 16-foot pole, or conversely that it's telling the residents in particular that you can stamp your feet and argue emphatically and say, look, the pole can be no higher than 15 or 16 feet because look at this illustration in this plan or this diagram. And so we just need to be careful that we don't create a false impression on the part of either the residents or the telecommunications people.
Yeah, and that was actually my concern about these two images as I looked at the height.
Well, do we need to have heights
No, not necessarily. Because technically it's regulated through the state anyway, depending on.
Well, and the heights have varied considerably in the applications that we did receive.
That's right.
I know that the one at the Cove of Turkey Creek is 26 feet high. The other ones that exist in where the existing poles obviously are somewhere between 40 and 50 feet. I can't remember what the heights. I think I saw 38 feet. So the heights are going to vary anyway. I think what I would like to see is more consistency in our commercial areas. I would like to have us narrowed down to a handful in the commercial areas and leave the residential areas a little bit more open so that the residents have a little bit, especially ones that don't have poles, have some more flexibility in what they'd like to see in their neighborhoods. But I would hate for us to see a whole bunch of different light fixtures. We just put a bunch of light fixtures on Concord Road. Specialty or not specialty, decorative light fixtures. That may be what we want to see in our town center. But I certainly don't want us having so many different options that we end up with a very chaotic look in our commercial and public areas, and leave that maybe to each of the neighborhoods to have their own kind of personality.
You're talking more along the lines of light fixtures, right?
Yes. I'm talking light fixtures, whether they extend off the side with the antenna up top.
Okay. That makes sense, and that's in the email I sent earlier today. I think the three areas I was wanting to try to get feedback from you all on in terms of the light fixtures would be, at least the areas that I see, is you got your town center area, or you might have a mixed use neighborhood area like the Swan Farm development over between Kingston Pike and Union Road. And then you got gateway areas where you're entering or leaving the town, whether it's, like you said, Concord Road's got the decorative lights there that have been largely installed for that corridor. Would we want something similar to that in other gateway portions of the town, so that as utilities are modified over time or things change, that we transition to that style of, at least that style of light fixture and mounting for the light fixture. And then, just have kind of and really what I wanted to look at with, just starting here with the mixed use town center area, which is kind of around the town hall area within a half a mile in all directions, basically. It would seem to me that those fixtures, similar to what we've seen on the town's property, the Pocket Park, where the Campbell Station Inn is, and then right across the street at the 35 North development and Starbucks development, where they have the bell-shaped light fixtures, decorative light fixtures that are required in the mixed-use town center part of C1. To maybe, look at a couple of fixture options within those areas, and then, like you said, Louise, try to be consistent with those as they're installed or replaced over time. So I don't know, in a mixed use town center area, if you all have, kind of a preference. Like I said, the Starbucks and the 35 North, which is what the Admiral's Corner is going to be called, they have the kind of the bell-shaped light fixtures. Over at Campbell Station Inn, the historic property has more of a traditional kind of acorn light fixture that is pretty different from those commercial properties. I guess a question would be, if you get the town center property there at the old Kroger, other properties in the town center area that are developed, is there a light fixture standard that LCU that we can work with LCUB on? Because again, as Jeremy mentioned last time, they don't want to have to keep in stock 10 different fixtures in their system. So I think we need to figure out a couple of fixtures in each of these areas and go with those as part of this plan. That would be my proposal. And then I think it's going to make a big impact because lighting, it's kind of like signage and landscaping and architectural requirements. It has a tremendous impact. I think you all really noticed that on Concord Road when that system is activated. I don't think it's been lit yet, but when that happens, I think it's going to make a big difference that people are going to recognize. So, do you all have any preference on fixture styles or how they're mounted on poles? Again, these would be poles that would accommodate telecommunications and other vertical utilities in the future.
Mark, do you have any information regarding the various prices for these fixtures? I think you say, well, gee, I really like the $1,000 one, the $100 one. Fine.
Yeah. No, I really don't. I guess an objective of mine tonight was just to look at different fixtures and see if you all, recognized any in those areas that you felt we ought to encourage. Maybe just a couple of different styles. Because these styles here that are on the screen are kind of pretty different in some ways, but they're similar in other ways. This is just basically an inverted version of this. And these are both kind of a traditional, light fixture shape. And there's other.
Mark, I think we might be better off taking a look at what we already have existing, because I know that what's in on the Mayor Ralph McGill Plaza looks a lot different than what's coming up Concord Road.
Yeah, it
we
does.
kind of need those before us. The Concord Road, some of them are mounted on the existing wood poles. So it's not, some of them are the pole and the light fixture, and some of them are mounted on a pole. So I think we need
they're
those.
all on metal poles. All those on Concord Road, all those are on metal poles. There's some of them are on an existing system.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But on the west side of Concord Road, those are all just poles for street lighting.
Yeah.
I think they just have street lights on them.
But we have some of the decorative arms on existing LCUB poles as well. So,
yeah, I mean, I would think that style, if you all like that style, would be certainly good for gateways, because we've already got it at one of our major gateways, Concord Road.
Well, I don't have a problem. I mean, I don't know that it's a matter of whether I like it or I don't. It's there, and we need to respect that. If we need to be aware of what's existing, because it does get a very inconsistent and cluttered look throughout the rest of the town when we start just kind of putting this kind of light fixture here and this kind of light fixture there. I really feel strongly that especially on Campbell Station Road, on Kingston Pike, if we want to have a consistent look, we kind of need to land on one, because it can really, that's kind of how I feel about that.
kind of agree with Louise that this is probably the time to kind of standardize around the whole area, including maybe even the residential areas a little bit. I would hate to see us have 12 different choices.
Yeah, and I wouldn't want to propose that either. I mean, this fixture on the left is pretty similar to what is on Concord Road. Um, not exactly, but it's pretty similar. I think there might be of course, I've got some pictures of that. You know, this is more of an LED version, something you'd see a little bit similar to what is over at the Starbucks parking lot. Not exactly the same, but that's an LED, more of a contemporary looking fixture. But yeah, a lot of the lights on Concord Road are similar to this here in the upper right. And to me, it's a good looking fixture. Like I said, I haven't seen it at night yet. I'm not sure if it's operational yet. But I think it's going to make a noticeable impact to that corridor. People are going to notice that because it's going to be very different from what they've seen along other roads like that in other locations.
I think just as important as standardizing to the extent we can would be to also standardize what type of bulb is in there. Is it an LED? Is it a halogen light? Is it one of these sodium lights? Is it variable? Standardizing, I think, would be good because otherwise you end up with a rainbow set of colors of light, and that's not good. I think the other thing we should consider is ease of replacement of the bulbs in these things. Choosing one that requires two people to work for a half a day to replace one bulb would not be a wise choice if there's a solution that requires basically two people for 10 minutes.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yep. Are you all looking
I will
at?
say, I just looked up.
You go ahead.
I just looked up the spec on the ones on Concord Road.
Mm-hmm.
Those are LED fixtures, and I would encourage that from my standpoint, just from a longevity standpoint, no burnout. I don't know what color of tint you got on that. I'd have to look deeper in the specs. But I would encourage definitely LED standardization. And you can have a couple of different wattages and it wouldn't make a difference, depending on what area you're in, with the same fixture. And like I said, the one on Concord Road is LED.
Yeah, and almost all new, to my knowledge, almost all new lights are LED. So I think that's probably going to be the standard. It's going to, for one thing, John, it's not going to be replaced very often. So that'll lower that replacement cost. You won't have to do it much. And the cost of operation in the long run will be a lot lower too.
Agreed.
I guess the thing I would wonder about is, do we want to have a kind of a higher standard, visual standard in these gateway areas? And then once you kind of, let's say you come in on Concord Road, maybe, and I don't know how far you would go with this, but you kind of have to establish where these corridors are and where the lighting changes would occur. But I mean, are you all looking at differentiating between gateway areas versus just regular arterial roads like just general Kingston Pike and that area, or are you all wanting to encourage the same general light fixture throughout town as fixtures transition?
I honestly would prefer same light fixture throughout town. I mean, we put the banners along all over our town, Kingston Pike and Campbell Station Road, and it makes the statement that we're in Farragut. We require the signs, the street signs are blue. The street labeling signs are all blue. That is something that we required when we had to change over. If we do want to do a different, if we want to kind of be a little bit, give some latitude on that, I would highly encourage us to keep the same light fixture for the mixed use town center, which I look at from the street point of view, Jamestown Boulevard to Concord Road on Kingston Pike, and Jamestown Boulevard to Concord Road on South Campbell on Campbell Station Road. So I would want to at least see that light fixture replicated through all of that as it comes up through Concord Road. But really, when you extend up Concord Road, we've always, I mean, Campbell Station Road, we've always considered that intersection in Parkside to become the main entrance into our residential area of what we consider the town of Farragut. So it might want to extend straight up to Parkside. I mean, those are things that I think we need to think about and certainly work through with the Planning Commission.
Yeah, to me, the street light needs to be compatible with the street classification, because to me, these arterial streets like Concord Road or Campbell Station, Kingston Pike, if you want to go with the standard like what they're putting in Concord Road, that's fine. But I think that no matter whether that's in the town center area or not, if that arterial street is in there, the street light, all those need to be consistent. The thing is, these it's going to be, it may be that a major lighting change would only really occur when you have a major road project or something, that because the issue I can see is if you got a standard and maybe a telecommunications company comes out in one spot on South Campbell Station Road or somewhere else, and we're asking them to put in a light fixture that's completely incompatible with the rest of the fixtures along that corridor, then it's going to look a little odd. So that's kind of a challenge as to how you implement that kind of lighting change over time. I mean, it's kind of easy with Concord Road because the whole road is changing all at once over a 3-year period. So it's kind of easy to do that, but it's going to be how do we build this system as these things transition incrementally over the course of several years.
And I agree with you, thinking about like Everett Road or Virtue Road or Board Station, where you might just get one pole that has this light fixture on it, and if it's that decorative light fixture, does it look like it's sticking out like a sore thumb? So that is something that we need to recognize.
Yeah, because to me, it almost needs to be addressed as part of a major road modification. Maybe like if you're doing, Virtue Road or Union Road, for example, if you're having to move the whole distribution line system, somewhere else, maybe that's the time to look at that. And I don't know what the cost and all that would be, but it would seem to me that that'd be the time to transition out to what the community wants to see visually, rather than kind of doing it on a pole by pole basis where it really would look very odd for potentially years. I think it's easy in the town center itself, where you've got new streets, town center streets, local streets. All those could certainly have a consistent light fixture that can accommodate telecommunications. It's something like, these kind of fixtures here. That's something that, or maybe like these that Louise had sent over mounted at the top. Those should be pretty easy to deal with. It's really going to be addressing the arterial streets where the streets are fixed and, the infrastructure is somewhat fixed for at least the short term, and how you going to deal with that.
I recall somewhat a lot of political problems when we tried to change out the lights on Campbell Station after they widened it a while back. Y'all remember that?
I don't remember it, but
I remember it too. I had an opinion back then too.
So whatever we do, tread carefully.
Yeah.
Mark, more nerd stats here for you, so you don't have to look this up later. Your Concord lights are 4,000 K color temperature palette for LEDs. So if you want to stay with consistency, you may write that down and look up what that means. It's kind of in the middle of the spectrum. It's not
4,000 K.
Yeah, it's not your. Yeah, it's 4,000 K.
Do you know what the
it's
cost
not the bright blue color, but it's also not what your typical incandescent old school bulb of yellow. It's kind of yellowishy white.
Would you have time to email me that maybe sometime in the next few days, and just that information on that fixture?
Yeah, I can.
Or as much information as you can on that.
Yes, sir.
Do you have a lumens number for those lights as well?
Yeah, I can send that to Mark. It's I'm having a hard time seeing on my computer right here what it's around 5,000 to 6,000 lumens, somewhere in there.
Okay. Because to be complete, we really ought to specify lumens and temperature, or temperature.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good guide to kind of go by, I think, because I haven't gotten into that level of specifics yet. I'm just trying to get a general idea of if there's fixture styles that you all are, comfortable with in different locations.
Hey, this is David again. I remember quite well what Mr. Chipley is referring to when we talked about the feedback we received in talking about Campbell Station Road several years ago. I think, though, what we have now on Concord is a great head start into a new type of gateway lighting and look and feel to the community. I think Mark has already talked about the challenge that will be in trying to get that implemented throughout the rest of the arterial roads we have. If it's Campbell Station, if it's Kingston Pike, Brigsby Chapel, whichever ones we decided to do. So I think I kind of look at it a little bit like the sign ordinance. We have the signage has certain things in there that requires when you develop something new, you have to bring up to the new standards, whatever those are. So that would be a challenge. I think we just need to sit down internally and talk through what that would look like, and work with LCB obviously as well to figure out how we could work with them on this. But I think that's a good thing for us to continue working toward, if possible, and if the committee thinks that's a good idea or not.
Yeah, and we've worked at LCUB, we've worked with how you want to handle this, like existing structures. If you pick out a particular gateway light that you like and fixture, if you standardize on that, we can keep them in stock, and we can work out some kind of deal where, if a bulb goes out, instead of going out and replacing the bulb, we just go out and replace the fixture at the time. So slow, you don't have to put all that capital up front, but slowly over time, you get them all replaced.
That's good to know, Jeremy. Thank you. Yeah, we definitely need to sit down and talk through the costs on that.
This was actually a topic that I was going to bring up during our new budgeting session coming up, is how do we want to address bringing those lights up through at least the mixed-use town center. If this project comes to pass, it's something that we're going to want to pay attention to. So anyway, that's something.
Well, there's obviously a lot of the more you think about this, the more complex it gets in some scenarios. It's going to be relatively easy, and where you got new streets and new infrastructure, like maybe the town center project. I guess what I would like from you all, if you get an opportunity, and I can go back and address the comments you all made tonight, talk with the town attorney about some things. But if in the next few days you could kind of look through the images that are in this PowerPoint, and I guess just let me know if you see any that you would like in these different areas, and I'll try to see what the predominant desire is. I think Louise makes a good point. We've got two buildings that have been built under the lighting requirements of the mixed-use town center, and that's going to be the new brewery and the Starbucks building. And those both do have the bell-shaped lights. There isn't, those are obviously available. The thing is, those poles weren't designed for telecommunications. So again, we're thinking about vertical utility infrastructure in the future. And so we'd have to have a pole that's going to be bigger than those parking lot lights. But you could still have that bell-shaped fixture in kind of the mounting style that they have. Y'all might want to take a look at those if you haven't already, and just kind of see what you think about those. Obviously the Campbell Station Inn lighting is more historic to reflect that property. So bell-shaped lights would have been inappropriate for that property. But for new projects that are in the town center, maybe that's what we should go with, if y'all feel that that's a good looking fixture, because it definitely, to me, is very attractive. But if there's other styles that you all think would be better with new developments in the town center or the mixed-use neighborhood, then that's the kind of feedback that I would need to have, so that we can narrow this down to maybe one fixture in general for the town center and mixed-use neighborhood areas. The gateway areas, I think, are going to be a bigger challenge. And then new commercial areas, that's again going to be a challenge, because these are commercial areas that are in public rights of way. So you're dealing with generally arterial streets. And most of those arterial streets that we have in the town, other than South Campbell Station and Parkside Drive, have existing distribution line systems associated with them. So just thinking through how that would transition over time, how that would look, is something that I think we really do need to think about quite a bit. If y'all could do that on the mixed use neighborhood and town center at least, and then I'll try to look a little bit more into look at the fixtures on Concord Road. I know y'all been by those many times, but just take a look at those and see if that's kind of a style and a look that we might want to see expanded to different parts of the town, particularly along our arterial streets. That would be good to know, so that we can have this maybe a standard that we are moving toward, particularly with new road projects or major road renovations, that where a system is being moved in its entirety, that would be a time to go to this different standard. Maybe not require it for individual poles. In the short term, it would only come into play whenever the whole system's being changed. So just think about that too, because that's kind of the way I think it would need to work, because otherwise it's going to look very odd, and it's actually going to create the opposite effect of what the aesthetic plan's trying to accomplish. I think you're going to draw more attention to that vertical utility infrastructure, because it appears to be radically out of place with surrounding infrastructure along that street.
Speaking of that, did you get any feedback from the Sonia people and the Stonecrest people on the wood pole with the 5G antenna up at the top?
I've only had one email about that, and I sent them the plans, for that location. It was one of the locations on Sonia.
Yeah.
But other than that, I haven't had any calls or emails to me personally about it. Now, I don't know if engineering's had some. They've been kind of shepherding the installation phase of this. But
It
that
looks pretty. It looks pretty